looked at what you're doing on YouTube and very excited about what you're doing. I don't often wish I lived near Chicago, but but when I saw what you were doing, I thought I would love to be part of this, and we need more groups like this talking about important issues from different vantage points. We have so much to learn. Sometimes when you're searching for answers, you get more than you bargained for. That was the opening sentence in my book, Half the Church. When I started my quest to understand God's purpose for me as a woman, I had no idea where it was going to take me. I was lost myself, and not because I didn't have a roadmap. I grew up in the church. I'm a pastor's daughter. I knew exactly what my purpose was as a woman, that God created me to be a wife and mother. And when I graduated from college, that's the track I would go on. And when I graduated from college, there wasn't anyone I wanted to marry. And it went on for a decade. And in hindsight, as difficult as it was a gift from God for me to hit that wall. And it made me start asking questions about my purpose as a woman. Is it something I can miss? Is it something that can be taken from me? Is it something that can be ruined? Is it something I can be cheated of? You know, all the kinds of things that we all live under threat of, we want our lives to count, and we want them to count for what God created us to be. And that started me on a quest that was very personal, but quickly escalated into bigger issues. I began to hear that other women were asking questions too. Women that I don't think I would have noticed if I hadn't been struggling myself. Where their lives were taking a different track than what they expected, maybe because they felt a very strong call, or maybe because their lives were falling apart. And then I began to see that in this world, we live in a world of extremes where there are people of enormous power and people of appalling powerlessness. And I wanted to know if the Bible speaks into all of our lives, if it speaks into our lives from day one to our last breath, or is it just one section of our lives that matter? So those were the kinds of things that were on my mind when I went looking. And then I read the book Half the Sky by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Dunn, which just completely undid me. And it's about the plight of women and girls in the world. It's about sex trafficking, honor killings, child marriages, female genital mutilation. It's a book you should read. I think it should be required reading in seminaries. But it made me ask new questions, bigger questions. Is the message of the Bible something I can give to a woman who's coming out of sex trafficking? Is God's purpose for his daughters and for his sons indestructible? And so that's what I was looking for when I went to Genesis 1 and 2, to find out what the vision was before the fall. And I think, we argue over all kinds of passages in the Bible, but I wanted to know what he had in mind in the beginning. And it's interesting to me that when we look at Genesis 1 and 2, we've turned some of the statements that are there into cliches. I mean, we're just so familiar with it. It just doesn't rock us. And it should. And also we turn it into jokes. We make jokes about men, and we make jokes about women when we talk about the creation narrative. And some very serious foundational things are being made in those chapters. And God isn't making jokes at all. And so when I went into it, I was looking for universal answers. I want to know, what is my purpose from the first breath to the last breath? And I don't want to leave anybody out. And I don't want to make jokes. And I want to pay attention to what God is saying. And God is saying powerful things about us in those opening pages of the Bible. And the most important thing has to do with this idea of the blessed alliance. And I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't thinking about that. It just was there when I started looking. But when God created humanity, it is an absolutely staggering moment in Scripture, and it ought to take our breath away. When he says, let's make human beings be like us. And it's a showstopper moment in creation where it's a break from everything else he's been doing. And there is this special design that he is announcing for humanity. And it's more than you aren't a plant or an animal. It's more than elevating you beyond any other social system that exists. Created to be like God himself. It's a mission. It's a calling. It's an invitation to a relationship. It means you can't know who you are or why you're here or what you're supposed to do with your life if you don't know the God who made you. And that our number one calling in life is to know him. And to begin to see the world through his eyes, and to begin to love what he loves, and to care about what he cares about. And he put us here to look after things on his behalf, to be his eyes and his ears and his hands and his voice. And, it comes with enormous responsibility, and it invests every single human being with a call to leadership. And I was just blown away by all of this. And I just think, we just breeze past this and we don't even pay attention to what's going on here. But it says that when he created human beings in his own image, he created them male and female. And it's just like both of us, both genders, are given the same exalted calling and the same mission in the world. And there's no distinction here. And he sends them out. He blesses them. And he sends them out to be fruitful and increase in number, to fill the earth and subdue it. And we've reduced these to physical callings, and they certainly are physical callings, but they're also spiritual and theological callings, to reproduce image bearers of the living God. It's a call to the gospel. It's not just the call to procreation. It's a call that we all share. And the blessing rests uniquely on this male-female alliance to do God's purposes in the world. If we miss the point of the importance of the relationship between male and female, chapter 2 clears that up. In chapter 1, we get this strong vertical relationship that we must be connected to our Creator, that's our oxygen supply. Without it, we're lost. And so that's the fundamental fact about human beings, is they need to know their Creator. But the second is that we need to be in alliance with one another. And this is where the Lord creates the man, and he looks at the man and he says, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper, an Ezer," that's the Hebrew word Ezer, suitable, connecto, for him. And this is where the jokes start. And this is where we talk about marriage. And this is where people get left out of the conversation. But it doesn't talk about marriage in chapter 2 until the very end, when there is a very anti-patriarchal statement that is made that for this cause a man will leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. And in patriarchy, When you marry as a woman, you become the property of your husband's family. Your husband doesn't leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. You're stuck in that family as their property. So right in the beginning, there's an anti-patriarchal statement. But this is where, it's the creation of male and females, not the creation of husband and wife. All right? Implications for marriage are later discussed. But this is about little girls who are being born, are Ezers. And so I wanted to know what this word Ezer meant. And I began looking it up. And what I found was very interesting, that in the Old Testament, this word is used, translated normally helper. 21 times it appears in the Old Testament, and then they break it down. This is what scholars do. They do inventories of words to try to figure out what they mean. So 2 times it's used for the woman in Genesis, the creation narrative. 3 times it's used for nations that Israel is turning to for military aid when they're under attack. And the remaining 16 times, it's used for God as the helper of his people. Well, when the discussion, this discussion that's going on about gender in the church, when they realized that it was used for God most of the time, they decided to upgrade helper to strong helper. But then they wanted to argue about what do we mean by strong. And, one side said she's as strong as she wants to be, and the other side said she's strong, but it doesn't change her rank with respect to the man. Well, I went and looked up all those verses, all those 21 verses, and I began to see a pattern emerge. And this is what I say: you get into trouble when you keep digging, but I kept digging. And I started to notice a pattern that every time the word Ezer appears in the Old Testament, there's military language around it. The 3 nations want help, military aid. That's what they're asking for. They're being attacked by another nation, and they're not strong enough to fend them off. And so they're asking another nation, send your army to help us. And then I looked at the verses for God. And in those, every single one of those verses, there's military language, that God is our shield and defense, that he's better than chariots and horses, that he stands sentry watch over his people. And over and over and over again, I was terrified to look up the last verse, but it was in every single one. And then I went back to the Garden of Eden, and I realized that Eden is a war zone. We talk about paradise, this beautiful garden, but there's an enemy getting ready to make an attack. What do you call that? And there are dangerous trees in this garden that if you eat of these trees, you'll die. And the man is commanded to guard the garden. And the male and female are commanded to rule and subdue, which means there's going to be resistance to their efforts. And I concluded from that the Ezer is a warrior. That when God looked at the man and said, it is not good for the man to be alone, he was not making a joke about the man. The man was a masterpiece. He was created at the climax of creation, and he had just finished naming the animals. That is the beginning of science. That's zoology. And so, this is not some flawed human being, but the battle that they are going to face and the opposition that is going to come is so significant that the man needs strength beside him. Someone who will be in the battle with him, someone who will watch his back, someone who will cheer him on, someone who will be in the battle fully and wholeheartedly with him. And so the way I try to describe what's happening in this initial passage of the Bible, this is my license plate, by the way. I take this very seriously. And Tennessee is also taken, I should mention. But I think of the blessed alliance between male and female as a kingdom strategy. It's not just, wouldn't that be nice? But it's that this is how God knows his world will work the best and how we will flourish the most as his image bearers. And so I liken it to load-bearing walls, the blessed alliance, that God was launching his kingdom to stand on two load-bearing walls. And the first load-bearing wall is the relationship between God and his image bearers, male and female. This is our lifeline. We are utterly lost and off mission if we are disconnected from our Creator. And the second load-bearing wall is the relationship between male and female. And I can't explain exactly why this is what it is. There's mystery to this, just as there's mystery to the Trinity. But this is what is to make us strongest to move out from this center to do the work that God has called us to do in the world. And it means that the work of the enemy in his first assault was beyond brilliant, because with a single blow, the enemy brought down both load-bearing walls. God's image bearers rebelled, they were cut off from their Creator, and they were divided from one another. I mean, it was a total dismantling of God's purposes for creation. And the history of the world is the battle of the sexes and people who are disconnected from God. And here we are. This is where we are. And so it puts us in a position to try to find our way back to what it was God had for us in the beginning. And I think when we look at it in the church, we're sort of stuck in how we talk about gender. And when I see examples of the blessed alliance, here are the things that I notice, and I see it in the Bible, that when men and women come together and join in this strong alliance and God's purposes for the world move forward, they're kingdom-minded. It's not a power struggle. There's something more important that they're caught up in. And there's gospel living. There's sacrifices being made. They're putting the interests of others ahead of themselves. It's costly what's going on. But there's mutual flourishing. Both men and women flourish when this is happening. And I see it over and over and over again in the Bible when men and women come together. In the church, this is where we are, and hopefully this will be helpful in your table discussions. But we've divided into camps, and we've sort of, marked out the terrain in terms of complementarians and egalitarians. And complementarians believe that God has ordained that men should be the leaders and that women are to be the ones who follow. And egalitarians believe that leadership is defined by giftedness. And yet, if you take this line out to its extremes, you end up with these. At one end, if you go to the extremes of this continuum, we're on a continuum. We're sitting on a continuum when we have this discussion. And, there's no single point of agreement for either camp. They're sort of all over there. But I'm thinking, what are we doing on that continuum? Did Jesus come just to sort of tweak things and make things kinder and gentler? Or did Jesus come with his gospel to take us to a whole new place, to a whole new way of being male and female in the world? And that, I think, is the question before us. What did Jesus mean when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world"? And what are we called to as male and female? And in the book Maelstrom I wrote, and it's something we didn't get to see, because in the creation narrative, you come to the end of the creation narrative, and instead of seeing this wonderful, blessed alliance between male and female, taking the purposes of God out to care for things in the world, we have the fall. And everything comes crashing down. And we don't get to see what it would look like. And, Jesus shows us what we were called to be. But, it's like being asked to construct a Mercedes from auto parts that you collected from a junkyard when you've never seen a Mercedes. And this is where we have work to do, to say, let's don't settle for, tweaking our relationships the way the world does things. We are called to something vastly different. And we need to look at Jesus to see how he lived. And we need to look at examples in the Bible where the purposes of God are moving forward and men and women are doing this together, and they're stronger because they're with each other. It's very exciting to me, but I think Jesus takes us off that continuum, and we have work to do to figure out what that is.